The events of this story take place in the year 1923 between France and Egypt, when Aouf was the outstanding Egyptian student who received a scholarship at the Sorbonne University to study English literature. Aouf originally came from a poor family, and therefore he did not have any money for the additional expenses he needed, and for this reason he was in great need to work. But unfortunately, all the work he was finding conflicted with his study time, and when Aouf finally found a job that did not conflict with his study time, and he was regular at it, he found that he had become extremely neglectful in his studies. Aouf was in dire need of work, but at the same time, he needed to maintain excellence in order to ensure the continuation of his scholarship. Meanwhile, one of Aouf's teachers was a university professor named Jack. Mr. Jack was teaching English literature, and he was a very old man, but he admired Aouf and felt that he was ambitious and deserved support and help. At the end of the first semester, Mr. Jack decided to hold a mini celebration in his palace in order to reward the outstanding students in his class, and of course, Aouf was among these students. It was the first time that Aouf went to Mr. Jack's house. Aouf fell in love with this house from the first visit. It was a huge house, and Aouf had never seen anything like it before. Everyone was at the university confirmed that Mr. Jack is from a very rich family, but only this palace remained of that family. Aouf tried to mingle with everyone at the party and enjoy as much as possible. When the students began to leave from the party, Jack approached Aouf and told him that he wanted him to stay to talk with him on something, and indeed all the students left, and only Aouf remained. And then Mr. Jack spoke to him, saying that he knew that he was an outstanding young man who was interested and loved English literature, and that is why he decided to offer him a job. And this work required that Aouf help Mr. Jack in compiling Shakespeare's novel, The Cardinal, especially since it had not been assembled before. Indeed, there are many parts that Mr. Jack found, but there are other parts that do not exist, and they also need to be arranged. Mr. Jack told Aouf that he would give him financial compensation for that help, and he also offered him to stay with him in his palace until task finished. Mr. Jack's offer to Aouf was tempting. He needed money, and he was very impressed with the palace. This way, he will get the money he wants and will also live in this wonderful palace. Also, work will not interfere with study, but rather it will make it easier for him to study, especially since Mr. Jack owns a giant library full of English literature books that are not found anywhere else, even in the Sorbonne itself. Aouf agreed to the job offer and moved the next day to stay with Mr. Jack to begin the work that he had agreed upon. Mr. Jack was a stranger. He told him on his first day in the palace that he did not have any servants and that he did the entire work alone, assisted only by a lady who attended every week to clean the palace. Mr. Jack offered to take Aouf on a tour around the house, and indeed the two of them moved around the house. The rooms were beautiful and similar, and all their doors were open, except for only one door, which was a closed room, and this door seemed curious. Curiosity was evident on Aouf's features, which Mr. Jack noticed, and that is why he told Aouf that that room contains all the old memories that remained of his family, and that he keeps it closed because it contains a lot of old things that are no longer usable. Finally, he arrived to the room where Aouf would stay, and that room was adjacent to Jack's room. During his stay with Jack, Aouf noticed that Jack drank a lot of alcohol, and every night he drank it before going to sleep. Aouf would always hear Mr. Jack screaming from his room, but he was trying to convince himself that Mr. Jack was suffering from nightmares, or perhaps because of the alcohol. But the truly terrifying thing that Aouf could not overcome was the nightmares that became recurring to him. One nightmare that recurs every night, in which Aouf sees himself inside the locked room, and then Jack enters the room and stabs Aouf and kills him, but Aouf did not care either. One day, Jack and Aouf were working, and suddenly Jack felt very tired, so Aouf decided to help him go to his room. This was the first time that Aouf entered Jack's room, and then he noticed that it was an ordinary room, with only a lot of old books and pictures in it. Jack was with his family, as well as an old antique dagger that was placed on a small desk in the room. Jack's condition worsened, and he developed a high fever, and Aouf was keen to nurse him and take care of him all the time. After a week had passed, Jack's condition improved, and he decided to return to working on the novel with Aouf. But he started drinking alcohol again, but that night he was drinking heavily and looking at Aouf with incomprehensible looks. But Aouf was keen to complete his work and did not pay any attention to him. At the end of the summer vacation, Jack and Aouf finished compiling the novel, and then Jack asked Aouf to celebrate and told him that he would bring out a bottle of wine that had been aged since 1890 because that was an important occasion and they must celebrate it well. Aouf felt embarrassed, especially since he was a Muslim and did not drink alcohol, and so he decided to make Mr. Jack think that he was drinking alcohol with him and to throw away what was in his cup without Mr. Jack noticing. Mr. Jack drank so much alcohol that night that he began babbling a lot, and among this talk, Mr. Jack told Aouf about his family and said that his family was very wealthy. It owned almost a quarter of France, but after the Industrial Revolution, most of the property was lost and only one box remained for the family, and this box was one of the properties that the family preserved generation after generation, and this box was at that time in the possession of Edgar, Jack's father. And one day Edgar went to Jack and told him that his father, Jack's grandfather, had given him the box, which contained 2 bars of gold, and his will was that this gold should not be sold because its value would increase over time. That's why Edgar was keen to hide the gold from everyone, and one day Mr. Jack's uncle, whose name was Lionel, decided that he wanted to divide the money. He went to Edgar and told him of his desire. Edgar agreed and decided to give him his share of the lands and houses, but when Lionel demanded his share of the gold, Edgar strongly refused, and then many problems occurred between the 2 brothers, but one day everyone knew that Lionel had committed suicide. But Edgar told Jack that he did not commit suicide, but that he was the one who killed him because he demanded the gold, and he had to keep the will and preserve the gold and not sell it. And before Aouf could comprehend what Jack had just said, Jack stood up and grabbed Aouf's hand and told him that he would show him the gold. He went directly to the locked room and opened the locks one by one. Then he went to the box and opened it. Then Aouf looked in astonishment at the 2 bars and was in a state of very impressed. Jack was not in his normal state. He was greatly affected by the alcohol. That night he went to his room, forgetting to lock the door of the room that contained the gold box. After Aouf delivered him, he returned to his room and sat thinking about the gold. He could not leave the matter behind, and so he decided to return to that place, the room, to see its contents and look at the gold again. He actually went there and began to look at everything in the room, and he opened the box to take a second look at the gold. Then he noticed a small memoir booklet that was underneath the 2 bars. Aouf took the memoirs and began to read in them. These were memoirs Jack wrote on the first page of it that he is not writing this diary for anyone to read, but he is writing it because he wants to get rid of all those secrets that he kept inside him, so perhaps when he writes it, he will be able to forget them. And Aouf began browsing through the diary and discovered that Jack was basically Lionel's son, not Edgar's son. Lionel was very poor and weak in front of Edgar. When he went to demand his right and inheritance of gold, Edgar refused. After Lionel's insistence, Edgar decided to kill him and get rid of him so that he would not waste the gold. The police considered Lionel's death to be a suicide and did not file any charges against Edgar, who went and took Jack to live with him in the palace. But what Edgar does not know is that Lionel, before his death, told Jack everything and told him that he felt that Edgar was plotting to kill him because he was the only one who benefited from killing him in order to get all the gold for himself. And of course, Jack knew that Edgar had killed his father, and that was why he hated him. Jack's hatred for Edgar increased over the years, especially after he decided to officially adopt him and get rid of the name Lionel and call him Jack Edgar. One day, Jack was searching for gold in Edgar's room, and then Edgar was keen to punish him. And in fact, he locked him in one of the rooms and tortured him severely. And for this reason, Jack decided that it was time for him to kill Edgar in the same way that he had previously killed his father. In fact, Jack put poison in his uncle's drink, got rid of it, and became the official owner of the palace and the gold. After Edgar's death, many of Jack's family members wanted to go live with him in the palace, but Jack knew that they were all greedy for gold, so he killed them one by one until Jack wiped out his entire family and only him was left. Even when Jack got married and brought his wife, Lily, to live with him in the palace, he discovered that she was cheating on him with his friend, so he killed them. Jack knew then that he had acquired something strange. He had the instinct to kill, and he felt pleasure when he killed. At the end of the memoir, Jack asks who will inherit the gold after him, and he confirms that he feels that his death will be soon, and that he is certain that he will be killed like he killed many before. Aouf locked the diary in the room and went to his room thinking, how can a university professor be a murderer and think that way? Then he started thinking about gold and how he could get it. Aouf knew that Mr. Jack slept for long periods of time, and that is why he had the opportunity to steal the gold. Aouf said to himself that he would steal the gold and return to Egypt to sell the gold, and then he would not need the grant, as the money he would receive in exchange for the gold would make him very rich. But he backed out of that plan because he was the only person who knew about the gold, and therefore it would not be difficult for Jack to know that he was the one who stole the gold, and he would not leave it and would certainly report him to the police. That is why Aouf had to devise a new plan, and here he decided to kill Jack in the same way he killed his uncle. Indeed, the next morning he went to the chemistry laboratory at the university and was able to obtain a small amount of arsenic. In the evening, he told Mr. Jack that he would prepare a drink for him, and he put arsenic in it. Only a few minutes later, Mr. Jack began to feel the symptoms of arsenic poisoning, and then he began to laugh and told Aouf that he knew that he would kill him and that he took him to see the gold because he knew that he would do that, and in this way, he would get rid of his sins that he had committed. It haunted him all his life, and indeed, Jack died. And at the same moment, Aouf took the keys to the room from Jack's pocket and went up to get the gold, and wrote a paper saying that he was Jack and that he was giving that box to the owner of the paper because he had helped him compile the Cardinal's novel, and he used Mr. Jack's seal to make it confirmed. And indeed, Aouf returned to Egypt with the box. Aouf's family was surprised when he returned, and his father asked him about the strange box he was carrying, but Aouf told him that it was a gift from his teacher because he helped him do some things, and that it was worthless. From his first day in Egypt, Aouf began planning to sell gold, and the next morning he went to one of the major gold merchants. His name was Daniel. He asked him if he was buying gold, and here the gold merchant told him that he only buys gold that comes with an invoice in order to make sure that it is not stolen. And here Aouf told him that it is a large amount of up to 12 kilos of gold, and then Daniel asked him to come to his house in the evening talk about the matter, and indeed, in the evening, Aouf went to Daniel's house. Aouf wanted to get 150,000 in exchange for the gold, but Daniel confirmed that this price was too high, and he offered to pay only 100,000, and then Aouf agreed that the sale be on the day. Next, Aouf gets 50,000 then, and when Daniel finishes selling the dog, Aouf would have the remaining 50,000, and indeed Aouf returned the next day with the box to Daniel's house. He was impressed by the gold and asked Aouf to come with him to his office to give him the money, but Daniel picked up a knife from his desk and tried to hit Aouf. Fortunately for Aouf, he dodged the knife. He entered into a fight with Daniel, and Daniel was about to win against Aouf, but Aouf picked up a small marble statue from the desk and hit Daniel on the head. Daniel fell with his head shattered on the ground, surrounded by a pool of blood. Aouf knew at that time that he had killed Daniel, so he carried the gold box and headed off to his house. Aouf decided not to leave his room or to leave the gold box out of his hand. After several days in that state, Aouf began to suffer from delusions. He saw Daniel standing in front of him with his smashed head, and he also saw Jack, who was looking at him laughing as if he was mocking him. Aouf took Jack's diary out of the box and began writing down what had happened to him. One day, his father entered him while he was distracted and shaking and tried to talk to him, but as soon as he saw his father, he hugged the box and started screaming. His father came closer to pat him on the shoulder to calm him down, but he felt afraid and threatened. That is why he began to gradually retreat towards the balcony until he fell dead with the box next to him. Aouf died, and his father decided to throw the box in the garbage without even seeing what was inside it. Whenever he looked at the box, he remembered how Aouf died, and that is why he carried the box to the nearest garbage collector and threw it there. At this time, there was a young man named Roddy. Roddy was working as a blacksmith, and he was very sad because he had been married for years, but his wife had not gotten pregnant. Although the doctors told him that there was no contraindication for pregnancy and that he had to wait, he was unable to control his sadness. That's why he went to an Islamic cleric in one of the mosques and talked to him about what saddened and worried him. And here the cleric tried to reassure Roddy that everything would be fine. So he told him that there was a lot of goodness on the way to him, but this goodness was linked to the sacrifices that Roddy must make. And he also told him that his wife would be pregnant soon, but he would not be happy with this news. Roddy felt hopeful at what the sheikh told him and told him that he would definitely be happy with the news of the pregnancy because he had been waiting for it for years. In the evening, after Roddy finished his work and was heading to his house, he noticed a girl trying to talk to him. It seemed that she was a night girl and was waiting for anyone who passed by so that she could introduce herself to him. She was a beautiful girl, so Roddy responded quickly to her and decided to take her to have a little fun with her, and they both walked to one of the dark streets. Suddenly, two young men with knives came out of nowhere and threatened Roddy and took all the money he had on him. It seemed that this girl was their partner, and her job was to lure customers in order to rob them. These people not only robbed Roddy, but they also made sure to beat him and knock him unconscious. Indeed, Roddy fell, and after a short time, he regained consciousness. When he started trying to get up, he noticed an antique-looking wooden box with a large lock on it. Roddy was a blacksmith, so he knew that this lock was easy to open, and he decided to take it home with him. As soon as Roddy's wife, Fawzia, opened the door and saw her husband clearly showing signs of being beaten, she felt afraid and wanted to check on him, but he told her that he was fine and that he just needed his tools to be able to open the box. Fawzia brought the tools and Roddy began trying to break the lock, and indeed it only took seconds. Roddy opened the lock and Fawzia was standing next to him at that moment. The two of them felt extremely happy and amazed by the sight of the gold. Roddy closed the lock again and put the box under his bed and asked his wife not to tell anyone, especially her sister, who would tell her husband. The gold could be stolen. Roddy threatened his wife if she told anyone about the gold, he would divorce her. The next day, Roddy went to the cleric to thank him for telling him about the great livelihood that would come to him, but he noticed that the cleric was greedy and asked him for a share of this gold. But Roddy refused, so the cleric threatened him to report him to the police, and then Roddy smiled and told him that he would give him what he wanted in order to ensure that he would not be reported to the police. And when Roddy returned to his wife, he told her what had happened, and she told him that he was wrong and was not supposed to tell anyone, and that this man was threatening him, so he had to give him what he wanted in order to be silent. But Roddy then decided to. This man remained completely silent, so he went to his house and told him that he had sold the gold and wants to give him his share so that he could be reassured and let him into the house. At that time, he had in his possession a thin iron wire, which Roddy used to kill the cleric. The wire was thin and sharp, and that is why he strangled and slaughtered the man at the same moment and very quickly. Roddy's condition quickly worsened, and he began to refuse to go to work or leave the house in order to preserve the gold. Every day he looked under his bed to see that the gold in the box were still in place. Roddy completely transformed and began to doubt everyone around him, even his wife, Fawzia. One day, Roddy left the house after checking on the gold box. When he returned to his house and knocked on the door, his wife's brother-in-law opened the door for him. At this point, Roddy went crazy and rushed inside to check on the gold. He looked under the bed but did not find the box, so he lost his nerve completely. He ran towards the kitchen and hurried to where his wife's sister's husband was standing and asked him about the gold. The man did not understand what Roddy meant and did not answer him. Roddy had no choice but to put the knife in the man's chest and continued stabbing him in the chest and neck until he was certain of his death amidst the cries of Fawzia and her sister. Fawzia was screaming at him to calm down and telling him that she was the one who lifted the box to clean the floors of the house. Roddy was not convinced by everything Fawzia said and accused her of lying and beat her with a knife. Meanwhile, Fawzia's sister ran away and went to the nearest police station, and here the police went with her to the house and found Roddy. He seemed very strange and in a state of agitation and was throwing a knife. The police were able to arrest him and seize the box, and they made sure to translate the diaries that were inside the box. At that time, all the newspapers published this news, but for some unknown reason, publication of that story was prohibited, and it was not known where did the box containing the gold go.